Forsaken Mercenary Dropship by Jonathan Yanez. I first came across this book as a recommendation on Kindle after finishing Brad Buckmaster's second Contractor book, a Contractor being a gritty book series on mercenaries in a sci-fi setting that I might make a video on sometime. On a whim, I got the sample for Dropship and then the full first book of Forsaken Mercenary, and on my first read-through, I thought I had to make fun of this. Then I looked into the author and I hesitated. See, I watch and listen to a lot of channels that read and poke fun at books, book mock if you will, and they often feature authors that, to put it kindly, make things worse for themselves. Sometimes they mock tropes they then play straight, get into comment section fistfights, or just do and say stuff that almost invites criticism and scorn. I bring all that up to contrast with today's author here. Yanez doesn't blatantly employ AI like Billy Cool or make React video matryoshkas like Shadiversity. According to his own podcast, House of Wolves, after graduating with a degree in English and working in sales and management for a few years, Yanez quit his job to write, and seems to have achieved some success. He's still writing to this day, and from listening to a bit of his podcast, both he and his wife Jennifer seem plenty likable. So, let me make this clear. I'm not making this rant review thing out of malice. While I will criticize, nitpick, and otherwise say uncharitable things about his book, I don't hate Jonathan Yanez. If anything, he's the success story I'd like to imitate someday, and there are elements and segments of writing I genuinely like. Plus, if it wasn't already obvious, I have an affinity for sci-fi mercenaries and action media in general. When I finished Dropship, I was even curious enough to check out the other books in the series, and let me tell you, things only get weirder. But I also walked away with a ton of nitpicks, and a feeling like I was grabbing at a dust storm for a lot of the read time. I've split the book and videos into 3 separate arcs that I'll try to summarize, stopping to touch on moments that stood out, good and ill, and then giving my general thoughts on each arc and then the book as a whole. So, load your Mark IIs and keep an eye out for Immortal Corp. We're gonna hitch a ride on Dropship. The Moon Arc, Chapters 1 through 8. Our protagonist is the head Kenturian of a nightclub called the Half Moon, and the first chapter is him dealing with a bunch of thugs from a rival establishment called Reds. They've been causing trouble at the Half Moon for what is now the 3rd consecutive night, and the first thing Daniel says to these troublemakers at the club entrance is, "Sorry, we don't serve your kind here," I said, crossing my arms over my chest at the entrance to Half Moon. What tactful phrasing, Daniel. But no, he's not racist or sexist or any kind of ist. He just recognizes one of Red's thugs from a past night and doesn't want yet another fight. The conversation is briefly interrupted when a stranger points out the thugs slip knives past the club's scanner, and then the fight starts. Besides a brief scare when Kenturian Carl gets stabbed and Daniel is also wounded protecting him, Daniel and his subordinates take down the thugs very easily. While he can't seem to recall his past, he's got some kind of combat training, and feels more alive when fighting. Despite the knives, I found this first fight dull, and noticed a few points that needled at me. Daniel responds to a downward slash by charging forward and tackling his opponent. I'm no knife fighter, but picturing this move puts me on edge. Then there are multiple parts where the flow of a fight breaks, like I'm watching someone take their time in a turn-based game to examine the characters and the environment. And finally, this fight lacks stakes, literal and figurative. After all, this is the first chapter in what is now a series of 12 books, not counting supplementary material, which each feature Daniel on the cover. I think he looks a little different in all of them. But at any rate, I went in confident he wouldn't die, and while Carl's vision is put at risk, I barely know the guy, so threatening him isn't that meaningful either. I'll have more to say on this and other fight scenes by the end of this arc. After this fight, Daniel goes to the club's staff bathroom to check the wound, also revealing he's muscular and covered in tattoos he can't recognize. The bleeding had already stopped. I didn't know why, but for the last 5 years, I could remember I healed fast. Way too fast to be any kind of normal. This is how Chapter 1 ends. Knowing that Chapter 2 begins with more exposition on Daniel's healing factor, the last sentence's information feels like it should have been moved there, since the next to last line works fine to build up intrigue. Oh, and Daniel's name isn't actually used in this chapter. I checked. It appears in the book's description on Amazon, of course, but that's still a detail I think is worth pointing out. Chapter 2 begins by saying Daniel has a wolf tattoo on his shoulder, and that he doesn't know how he got his healing factor, or much of his past anyway. He just knows he heals faster than normal after he got smashed on the head with a bottle one time. The bleeding stopped fast and the wound was mostly gone come morning. With permission, head bartender Donna enters the bathroom and treats Daniel's wound, also asking about his past. Daniel doesn't know it either, so he just tells her to stop asking questions. This gets Daniel compared to Donna's dad. After my mom died, he was never the same. Always kind to me and there for whatever I needed, but he refused to open up to anyone else. Treatment done, Daniel's okay to head outside and meet the Praetorians. He got a false identity set up. The Prats responding to the incident are led by Captain Asher, and he's already got an inkling as to what's behind this string of incidents. Following the wishes of his boss, Mr. Tomb, Daniel lies through his teeth about the healthy competition going on. While Asher sees right through Daniel, he can't do much without being given an explicit accusation, so he just leaves. The rest of the night is uneventful, and Daniel leaves in the morning to walk home and drop some exposition on the way. Earth was a distant memory. After humans used up its resources, we tossed it to the side like a used napkin and made for the heavens. The moon was our first stop, colonizing the planet and creating massive domes to live inside. Smaller domes popped up inside their larger counterparts. We call these cities. The moon's not a planet, it's a natural satellite. Also, we call these cities is a strange line since cities already exist in our own world. Saying these were our new cities would work better since we don't yet have to make airtight domes just to breathe. Also, this means dome is just one of many cities with a big dome inside of a bigger dome. And yes, many real-life city names aren't exactly the most inspired, but dome feels way too phoned in to me, and I can't explain why. I'm sorry. Anyway, Daniel, not the most materialistic guy, heads to his rundown apartment in Dome slums and notices the doors open. He immediately draws his hand cannon. The Mark II was an old-school weapon built for one purpose, to eviscerate whatever I pointed it at. When humanity had upgraded to blasters, I preferred to stick with a dependable weapon. My Mark II produced enough stopping power to penetrate any helmet or armor. Tungsten steel bolts acted as ammunition for the weapon. Daniel scares off an old woman and approaches his door cautiously when the intruder just calls for him to go inside. Daniel recognizes the voice as the stranger who warned him about the knives, though he keeps his guard up as he enters the apartment. Chapter 3 begins with Daniel finding the stranger, Wesley Cage, having a smoke, both hands on the table. After confirming Daniel's amnesia and getting him to reluctantly lower the gun, Wesley drops him tidbits on his past. Daniel was an operative working for Immortal Corporation, a shadowy organization that hides itself behind many shell companies and smaller offshoots. 5 years ago, Immortal Corp lost contact with Daniel while he was on a mission, and he was assumed dead until he was discovered. When Daniel asks if he was an assassin, Wesley's answer is both cryptic and cliched. You're an asset deployed in the field serving a much greater plan. I know it's hard to believe, but we're the good guys here. There are no more good guys, I said. Just varying shades of bad.
Nobody's innocent.
Wesley has been authorized to give Daniel a new mission, head to Earth and find out what rebel group Phoenix is up to. He also gives Daniel a small steel disc, a boarding pass for a dropship, and the promise that completing this mission will earn answers to all of Daniel's questions. Daniel initially refuses, but it's either this or life as a Kenturian at a bar, and after Wesley leaves, Daniel realizes he wasn't meant for that kind of life. I made my decision at the table that night to go. If I knew what was in store for me through the coming days, I would have burned that envelope there and then. This end of chapter line is an obvious attempt at a cliffhanger, promising whatever Daniel finds on Earth will be nastier than what he expects. But while that is true, and he does kind of wish he kept his life at a bouncer, when that does happen, the intent is nowhere near as serious as this line might suggest. Chapter 4 begins with Daniel leaving his apartment in the morning and heading to a data center. Think of the computer lab at a public library, except the lab is the entire building. There is everyone here from kids who wouldn't be out of their teen years looking up trending videos to the homeless who use the monitors to see what food banks were open and when. Daniel looks up exposition on Immortal Corp and gets nothing. Looking up Wesley Cage, Daniel sees that he was a major in the Galactic Government, creatively called the Galactic Government, and received many decorations for his time in the service, including an anti-terrorism mission. After his service, though, Wesley basically dropped off the map. Leaving the data center, Daniel decides now's the time to put on the metal disc, which has spikes letting him attach it behind his right ear. Immediately, Daniel hears a woman's voice in his head, and I'll just read this section out, with the aid of a little text-to-speech.
Hello, Daniel Hunt. My name is X1097,854,107,890,
she said.
I will be able to assist you on your mission.
I looked around quickly to any woman who was beside me. A tall blonde to my left gave me a strange look as I gawked at her. A brunette to my left wagged her eyebrows like she wanted me to say something to her. Sorry, did you say something? I asked the brunette. I don't know, handsome, she said, batting her eyes. What did you want me to say?
No, that's me.
The other female voice in my head said.
X1097,854,107,890.
What is this? Some kind of dream or something? I asked, blinking and working my jaw around my mouth. A metallic tang puckered my taste buds. Did you say I was in your dreams? The brunette flushed. She looked worried for a moment, then laughed. Well, buy a girl a drink first before you go laying it on so thick.
No, I'm speaking to you through an oral link.
X1097,854,107,890 answered. Who are you? I asked. My name is, the brunette said, but the female voice inside my head spoke over her.
My designation is X1907.
Okay, I get that, but that's way too long of a name, I said, still looking at the brunette, even though I was speaking to the voice inside my head. That's not gonna work. We're going to have to change that. Well, that's rude, the brunette said with large eyes and an open mouth. I've never been insulted about my name before. My mother gave me this name and I should have seen the slap coming a mile away. If I wasn't talking to a voice inside my head, debating whether I was going crazy or not, I would have. The brunette slapped me across the right side of my jaw and walked away. She hit me pretty hard too. Could have had a future as a Centurion with a little training. For the most part, the quality of dialogue remains consistent throughout the book. I'll let you decide what you think about that. Anyway, Daniel gets to know his new companion, an advanced AI whose name he shortens to X. She can directly feed him information inside his head and onto his pupils, but Daniel will have to speak aloud to communicate with her. Daniel immediately asks for more exposition. Info on Immortal Corp is restricted, but X can tell Daniel that the Galactic Government, henceforth the GG, formed when Earth's resources were depleted about 1,000 years ago. They set up the first colonies on the Moon and Mars, and may have gone even farther into space. Not sure why they're called the Galactic Government when they haven't officially made it out of the solar system, but perhaps the name reflects the ambitions of its founders. I don't know. About 10% of people chose to stay behind, either averse to space travel due to their faith or just too attached to Earth. An Earth that's, these days, become a wasteland, mostly populated by warring gangs and tribes constantly struggling over territory. Phoenix wants to return Earth to its prior, not wasteland state, hence its name. Before we can get more exposition, Daniel arrives at the docking yard where his dropship is. The domes of the moon colonies open up like an airlock to allow ships to arrive and depart, and there are plenty of security systems and Prats nearby. It's here that Prats are called Praetorians, even though the word Prats was already used in Chapter 1. The dropships themselves were mid-sized rafts with twin thrusters on either side of their short wings and a ramp that opened in the rear. Flat black, they were painted with the symbol of the Galactic Government, a black feline creature with large fangs protruding from its upper jaw. As Daniel waits in line at the docking yard, a GG prison transport rolls up. A very muscular man, nearly 7 feet tall, is brought out of the transport's rear, and he tells the awaiting passengers, "Anyone who doesn't want to die should leave now." Chapter 5 begins with this massive man noticing and trying to intimidate Daniel, but he doesn't even deign to respond, and the guy just gets taken away in chains. X and some of the crowd ID the guy as Alaren Jacobs, aka the Reaper, a warlord on Earth with a gang measuring in the hundreds. Among his crimes are murder and grand theft of a GG dropship. Daniel carefully hands his Mark II over to the Praetorians and meets a Captain Zoe Valentine, who's seen Daniel at the Half Moon a few times. While she's suspicious at the sudden departure, the paperwork checks out, so she gives Daniel permission to board the Fury. Before he can do so, alarms sound, a bunch of insurgents in a hovercraft swoop in and attack, and Alaren beats down the Prats holding him captive. Daniel quickly dives behind a dropship for cover and watches the battle, wondering, "Are you just going to hide here like some kind of victim?" I asked myself. "Is this who you are?" The truth, of course, was I really had no idea who I was. One thing I knew was who I wasn't. I wasn't the guy who hid when danger erupted. I was the danger. Despite these thoughts, and some inner animal that's eager to fight, truth is that Daniel isn't going to be dangerous to anyone until the next chapter. Captain Valentine, now holding a rocket launcher, steps into the line of fire of the hovercraft's twin machine guns, a suicidally dangerous move made survivable by her personal portable shield. The personal portable shield was good at turning a few energy blasts, but not made to be sustained for long-term damage. Red blast around sizzled and sparked across her shield. The yellow globe around her protected her for the time being. Valentine destroys the hovercraft with her launcher before rushing at Alaren and the people trying to break him out. Daniel watches this firefight as his internal fight continues. "Who are you?" I asked myself again. "Hiding while others fight for you, is this who you are?" I stopped thinking about it and moved into action. Chapter 6 begins with Daniel rushing to Valentine's back, getting her grazed to the ankle in the process. The smoke from the destroyed hovercraft is so thick it isolates Valentine, Daniel, Alaren, and the 3 remaining insurgents who are helping him escape. Valentine drops her launcher and domes 2 of the insurgents with her sidearm before she runs dry and her PPS runs out of juice from the return fire. By this time, she's close enough that she just charges Alaren and punches him as Daniel takes care of the last insurgent. He lifted his weapon to fire again. I didn't give him the chance. I batted his weapon to the side, coming down across his jaw with a right hook. He staggered back. I wrenched the weapon from his hand and slammed the butt into his face. My target went down hard. I moved over to look behind me where Alaren and the captain battled it out like 2 legends meeting on the field of battle for the first time. Alaren yanks off Valentine's helmet, Valentine breaks his finger, and then there's some mid-fight banter. "You elitists think the Earth will be silenced?" Alaren spat a wad of blood on the ground next to him. He flexed massive muscles under the tight-fitting prison uniform. "You think the galactic government cares about you or me or any of us?" "I don't know and I don't care." Captain Valentine looked over at me for the briefest moment before circling the man known as Reaper. "All that matters is that you're going back to Earth." Alaren looked at me for the first time with disgust. "And who are you? Some misguided soul that thinks he's doing the right thing?" "Just a guy trying to get to Earth," I said. "Right now, you're not making that easy." The fight resumes, and while Alaren roughs Daniel up pretty badly, Valentine's able to club him unconscious with a pulse rifle one of the dead guys dropped. Praetorians run in and Valentine orders them to clean up the scene. Daniel waves away the medics, and a few minutes later, he's finally on board the Fury. Like Valentine promised, Alaren's there too, still unconscious and in chains again. As he waits for takeoff, Daniel watches the other passengers. Valentine, who took a seat next to Daniel, explains the passenger demographics. "Most people are trying to get off Earth these days. The dropships I run are half Praetorians to work the prison yards and half workers hired by the elite to search Earth for anything valuable. Scavengers." My eyes turned to the men and women in dark-stained overalls and scarves. I'd heard of the rich hiring the poor to do their dirty work. What a delightfully naive-sounding line coming from a man who was arguably doing the exact same thing the night before. Anyway, eventually there was a call for everyone to buckle in. The Fury was at max capacity. All the seats were taken. We probably both know how max capacity works, but I just wanted to share that those lines are indeed in the book. As the two buckle in, Valentine asks Daniel if he gets space sick. He says he hopes not. Chapter 7 reveals that while space travel doesn't make Daniel puke, it does make him a bit queasy, and he has to remind himself that no, the ship isn't going to rattle to pieces in space. Trying to distract himself, Daniel spots a locket Captain Valentine's wearing, and, noticing his gaze, she reveals a photo of her daughter, Chesha. Things didn't work out with her father, Valentine explained, caressing her daughter's face with her thumb. He took off, wanted nothing to do with us, found a new family to love instead. Chesha's on Mars right now. I knew if I couldn't be with her, then I wanted the best for her. I only get to see her a few times a year. I know this doesn't help, but I'm sorry to hear that, I said. That must be rough. Yeah, Valentine agreed, looking at the image of her daughter one last time before closing her locket and dropping it back in her armor. She shook her head, replacing her look of sadness with a wild grin. But what are you gonna do, right? I worked my tail off in the GG to make enough to provide the best for her on Mars. I see her as much as I can. There's not much else for me to do at the moment. In a few more years, I'll have the rank to request a transfer to Mars. Then I can be with her. Valentine asks about Daniel's own family, but what with the amnesia... The only inkling I had of ever being in a relationship with someone came from a dream. A dream I had not often enough. Well, who knows? Valentine chuckled. It might be a lucky day. I heard the Earth is full of single, eligible ladies looking for a moon daddy to better their lives. I couldn't help but grin. Captain Valentine was all right in my book. I had only known the woman a short time, but in that time, I felt like I had a good grasp on who she really was as a person. I bled with her, laughed with her, and now she opened up about her family. Something told me I could trust the woman. While I definitely wouldn't call Valentine and Daniel strangers, this character judgment still feels a bit odd considering they've mostly known each other for less than a day, even if they fought alongside each other and such. Anyway, Daniel then asks Valentine about Phoenix, but she doesn't spend enough time on Earth to offer any more exposition, and Daniel can't speak to X without seeming like a crazy person, so he just goes to sleep. That's when he starts to dream. I found myself on a building top in a city I didn't recognize. The twin domes overhead told me I was on the moon, but the moon was a big place. I scanned the dark horizon in all directions, seeing nothing I recognized. What I did see was a brilliant display of stars overhead. They were so bright, and there were so many of them, I was lost to the wonder for a split second. Daniel, shaken from his reverie by the guy next to him, an older man with an eye patch, a gray bandana on his head, a blaster, and a sword. As he talks with Daniel, he's securing some rope to the belt in his waist. Well, come on, mijo, he said in a not unfriendly voice. We have a job to do. Oracle is going to give us the green light in any moment now. Check your gear. Right, I said, looking down at my own belt and rope. One end of the dark rope was tied to the thick belt I wore, the other to a series of pipes that sprouted from the top of the building's roof. I carried a blaster on the right side of my hip. Not just any blaster. The familiar shape of the Mark II met my eyes. A knife in the inside of my left boot and a heavy rifle on my back completed my gear. Didn't Daniel imply in Chapter 2 that the Mark II wasn't a blaster? Anyway, the older guy tells Daniel things will work out with her, and mentions of a woman makes Daniel start to remember something. But he gets interrupted when Oracle starts talking in Daniel's ear somehow. I guess both guys have earpieces or something. Anyway, the pack is clear to proceed, weapons free. Roger that, the older man next to me said. Preacher out. Preacher? I repeated to myself in my head. That was his name. I did know him. Somehow the name fit like I had known it all along. Memories of a past with the man washed over me like a tidal wave. I remember trading with not only him but others. In the memories now, I couldn't see their faces, but I saw their forms. They weren't just friends, they were more like family. Brothers and sisters bonded by a common past. Preacher says that once they enter, Surprise will probably get half the enemies, and that they'll both get one half of the remaining. Then the two approach the building's edge and leap off, Daniel already getting excited for the fight that's ahead of him. Chapter 8 begins with the ropes going taut and Preacher shooting at the windows of the floor they're attacking. Daniel does the same with his own window, and then the two are inside. It's not just some office, but a super fancy private office, complete with a bar. As predicted, about one half of the security is shot down before they can react, and the pair pretty easily take down the rest, Preacher using a glowing red sword to do the job. Preacher gets hit and falls down just as they're finishing up, but he's still conscious. "You're not the only one who heals quick," he said with a grin. "It doesn't feel pretty, but I'll be fine. Armor should have turned the worst of it. I was just too close to the blast. That would have shredded a normal man. Help me up." I extended a hand, fixated on how Preacher had used the word normal, as if it were a word that had no business in the same sentence as us. Then Preacher finishes off the wounded. "Lord, we send these souls into your hands. You are the ultimate decider on who is worthy or unworthy. I am your servant, you are my judge," Preacher said as he finished the gory work. Oracle then calls to report a change in the plan. They need to get the contents of a safe behind a painting in the other room. They find the painting, a big portrait of some regal-looking guy, and Preacher starts to cut open the safe with his sword. As Daniel covers him, he spots movement beneath the table in the room. It's a boy no older than 9, and he's clearly scared out of his mind. The boy and I just stared at one another. In my dream, I knew certain things. I knew I was a killer. I knew Preacher was as well, despite his chosen name. I knew we didn't wear masks, which meant we left only bodies in our wake. No survivors. That last line bothered me more than it probably should. I can buy that a morally shady company wouldn't want anyone to witness its shady activities, even if it means killing kids. But the fact neither Daniel nor Preacher are wearing face coverings feels incredibly strange if their identities are meant to be kept secret. We've got the budget for blasters and glowing swords, but not enough for balaclavas? Hell, Preacher's wearing a bandana on his head. Why not get 2 more to put on his and Daniel's faces? That's not really that important. What is important is that after some inner conflict, Daniel just stays quiet and motions for the kid to hide, and Daniel and Preacher leave without hurting him. Then Daniel wakes up. The captain's voice had woken me from my dream. "Passengers, we're entering Earth's orbit. Please stay seated. It's going to get a little bumpy." So now that we're about to touch on Earth, I should talk about my general thoughts on the book so far. This segment successfully paints the broad strokes of the world and protagonist situation while building some intrigue as to what future chapters will bring. So in that sense, it's a pretty successful intro. That said, I had quite a few nitpicks I wanted to share alongside my general read of Daniel at this point. I said it earlier in chapter 1, but the 3 action scenes we get in this segment all feel kind of bland to me. Let me set up and lay out another book's fight so we can compare. Midway through chapter 7 of Killing Floor by Lee Child, Jack Reacher and this one guy, Hubble, are in prison, just chilling in a bathroom, when the two get separated by a bunch of Aryan Brotherhood assholes. Reached alone in a prison bathroom with 3 of these big, heavy guys. Because he doesn't realize the attack's coming, the big boss asshole gets the first strike. Then, right after, his buddy gets his arms around Reacher's neck to strangle him. Back when I was talking about the first fight, I said I knew Daniel couldn't die because he's the protagonist of a 12-book series, and Reacher is arguably worse since his series is longer and he lacks any superhuman powers. But after a little contemplation, I realized it's unfair to say it's specific to Dropship or Killing Floor, since, really, this is an issue every life and death conflict has at the beginning of basically any work. Unless your plot starts with a dead protagonist, but isekais sometimes kill my interest faster than Truck Gun anyway. The real question is usually not whether the protagonist will survive, but how. To steal from Timothy Hickson's On Writing and World Building Volume 2, this is the macro of a fight, where it fits in the larger story and what the fight's broader events are. In Dropship, this first fight asks how capable Daniel is in battle, and what he'll do to protect his allies. Yanez answers that Daniel is plenty capable and will risk himself to protect others, even if he feels the need to keep secrets from them. Both are good qualities to reveal about a character since they raise interesting possibilities for the story ahead. But the micro, that's the word-to-word, sentence-to-sentence flow, that makes the answers given on a macro scale a lot less convincing. For starters, actions are phrased in a way that bogs down or outright interrupts events, kind of like how you're wondering if Reacher hasn't become a pretzel yet. We'll get back to him eventually, I promise. For now, have some excerpts from Dropship. I didn't just slam into him and let him fall backward. I carried him off his feet, then used torque to hammer him into the ground right inside the doors. Patrons yelled as they moved out of our way. The outside of the Half Moon was actually just a wide hall intended to hold a line. On the far end, a row of ascent cylinders allowed our customers access to the rooftop club. Carl gritted his teeth. He tried to stand, leaving his face open for another strike. I ran faster. It was a short distance. Still, I was going to have to throw everything I had at this jump, or Carl was going to be passing for a space pirate with a patch for the rest of his life. Searing pain crossed my senses. I knew I was wounded. I also understood right now was not the time to stop and look at the wound or pause to understand how much pain I was in. That's a lot of words to communicate ideas like, I slammed in through the doors, then onto the ground. If I didn't make this, Carl would lose an eye. I got hurt, but I had to keep going. And then there's the lack of detail given. Only two of Daniel's four buds to get names are Carl and Vasily is just called a mountain of a man. The actual actions that Daniel takes generally share the same structure of I did this, then did this, and the opponent did this. It gets arguably a bit worse in Chapter 8. Remember, that's the firefight taking place in a fancy office. Shouting erupted as those in the room reached for their own weapons. Preacher took down 3 of them in as many strides as he crossed the room. The blaster in his hand fired just as soon as he lined up shots. I slammed the butt of the pulse rifle into my shoulder, aiming down the barrel and following his orders. I cleared the left side of the room, sending targeted bursts from my weapon at anything that stood in my way. I'm not including the whole scene because this review's going to be long enough, but no one dies behind cover or anything for the entire fight, and that makes it very hard for me to buy into Daniel or Preacher's combat skill. If I had to list some of Daniel's qualities, I'd include that he's good at fighting. If I had to explain how Daniel's good at fighting, the most I could give is that he's clearly combat trained and moves fast. Can't even say he's fast enough to dodge blaster fire or anything like that. There's no mention of Daniel or Preacher attempting to avoid enemy shots. Reacher, right. Well, he gets out of his situation by kicking Boss Asshole in the dick. Then he breaks the fingers of the guy trying to strangle him. And when the third asshole gets Reacher trapped between 2 sinks, he reaches up, puts out an eye, and that's when the tide turns. The boss man was up on one knee. I kicked hard at his face, missed, caught him in the throat instead, smashed his voice box, he went back down. I went for the big guy's other eye, missed. I held on with my thumb, like pushing it through a bloody stake. He went down. I spun away from the wall. The guy with the broken fingers ran for the door. The guy with the eye out was flopping about on the floor, screaming. The boss man was choking on a smashed voice box. I was grabbed from behind again. I twisted away. A red boy. 2 of them. I was dizzy. I was going to lose it now. But they just grabbed me and ran me to the door. Reacher narrowly wins through sheer brutality and, frankly, luck. After the fight, he notes that he only broke those fingers because the guy strangling him wasn't using the right technique. Plus, this fight directly feeds into the greater plot of Killing Floor because, on top of all the mysteries raised in the past chapters, Reacher now has to figure out why a complete stranger tried to arrange his death. Reacher's put in enough danger that we see him really give his all to get out, showing us how he's good at fighting. The short sentences and descriptions stop us from lingering on a moment too long, and the fight reveals a part of the greater conspiracy Reacher gets dragged into. I wish Dropship did more of these things, because, I'll be blunt, while most of the later fights are connected to the plot, they continue to suffer from awkward pacing and a lack of stakes and pressure. I rarely felt like any fight was a genuine struggle to survive, so I often struggled to pay attention. I also dislike how descriptions of scenery and people are done in general because they sometimes felt incidental or irrelevant to the scene they appeared in, to the point where I won't be sharing most of them throughout the rest of the review. Kind of a crazy comparison, but I vastly prefer how descriptions are handled in Moby Dick. While I haven't completed that book because it's, longer than I'm used to, it uses many more words in its description, and it gets a lot more out of them. That's its own disadvantage, admittedly, like I showed you, over 130 chapters, but it makes Yanez's own descriptions feel incredibly sparse and emotionally distant. In Chapter 1 of Dropship, the Half Moon is described as popular, crowded, on a rooftop reached by ascent cylinders. There's a second level with offices and a staff bathroom, and the club is a stage where some musicians play old-school blues. These all tell us what the club is, and some of these features are relevant to the actual story, but the rest are essentially background elements, ones that I had to double-check to find because I didn't find them at all memorable. We don't even know if Daniel, say, likes all the noise and problem customers that come with working at such a popular spot. He just decides it's not his thing and leaves. Doesn't even leave a 2 hours notice for Mr. Tomb. In fact, most of the people Daniel meets in this first part, Carl, Vasily, Donna, Captain Asher, they don't appear for the rest of the book. Sorry, back to descriptions. In Chapter 2 of Moby Dick, Ishmael immediately gives observation and opinion on seeing the Spouter Inn sign. The building's so dilapidated it looks like it was moved from a burnt district. The whole structure leans over sadly. It's on a corner where there's this terribly cold wind blowing. There's a big sidetrack about how it sucks to be outdoors when it's this cold. And it's the perfect place for Ishmael since the lodgings are sure to be cheap. Besides having more emotion attached, the description informs the narrator's decision-making and thus moves the plot along. Eventually. Wait, is Ishmael closing out the chapter with a fucking pun? Let's move on as well. The last of my big complaints so far is how exposition is handled. Now, considering this story began in a city on the moon, it should be pretty obvious this is an original setting, so of course, there's some explaining that's necessary. That said, most of the exposition here is just straight up telling the reader stuff, and while that stuff does help explain why things in the setting are the way they are, it's also blatant space filler. It's always given during travel or while Daniel waits. It's a much harder task, but I vastly would have preferred having this stuff sprinkled throughout the text, or even, in some cases, left out for the reader to infer or guess at. For example, we don't really need to be explicitly told most of humanity left a desolate Earth if we're already on the moon, there's warlords on Earth, and a group is trying to resurrect it from its current desolate state. A lot of the other info revealed by this explanation, like Cage's record in the galactic government, isn't really used in this book either, which makes me curious as to why it was included, even if it's reasonable for Daniel to look up his own employer. Also, the use of ancient Roman names for security forces isn't explained in this book. I'll have to read the whole series to see if it ever is. So, while this arc does successfully exposit the world and set up what the book's conflict will be about, it does so rather inelegantly. And the fight scenes, they don't meaningfully threaten the protagonist, nor make his inevitable victories very convincing. So, what are my thoughts on Daniel? He starts this story strong, selfish, and having almost nothing to really care about. He protected Carl from eye loss, but Daniel hides his own injury and healing factor from view. His apartment is cheap, and the only real valuable he's got is his Mark II. Beyond that, his only personal connection is literally a dream. Everybody else is strictly business. And worse than his lack of past, in this state, Daniel has no clear future. We never learn if anywhere on the moon or Mars would provide greater safety or comfort, or if his fake idea would even hold up well enough to let him move. If he stayed where he was, he'd have to continue to hide any wounds he got, lest he be found out, and his only hope of any progression would be promotion in the Half Moon. That could mean more opportunities for violence, which Daniel does somewhat enjoy, but it would also give him more wealth he doesn't care for and more attention to avoid. Donna compared Daniel to her father, kind to her but distant to everyone else, and while this clearly establishes Daniel as someone whose better qualities are concealed by cynicism and grief, her literal words don't accurately describe the situation. After his wife's death, Donna's dad still had his daughter. While Daniel doesn't know if he's lost anyone close to him, right now, everyone else is at arm's length or farther. This starts to change after he accepts the mission from Immortal Corp, leaving behind a possibly criminal boss in favor of pursuing possibly unpleasant answers. While he tells Alaren that he's only fighting him because the attempted escape is delaying his mission, Daniel's intervention does help Valentine stop a dangerous foe, and Daniel admits the fight did bring them closer together. During their conversation afterwards, Daniel also doesn't try to shut down Valentine when the topic turns to him. He just answers as best he can, and as we'll soon see, the two part on good terms. I've nitpicked the hell out of the word-by-word writing, and I intend to continue to do so because I had to read it more than once for this video, but the broader story elements are why I can still see good qualities in this book and series. At its core, this is a man's journey to discover and change himself, and I found that compelling enough to continue to the next book. Let's keep going with this one.